This week, my coworkers Vlad Babkin and Chase Snyder join me to discuss Black Basta, the chat leaks, and so much more. Stay tuned. Below the Surface, coming up next. Welcome to Below the Surface, episode number 46, being recorded on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. I'm, of course, Paul Asadoorian, your host for today, joined by my coworkers. Vlad Babkin has joined us again. Vlad, welcome.
Hello. Hello. Nice to
And
see you all
Chase Snyder is here with us. Chase, welcome.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Vlad.
What's going on, guys? Just before we dig into it, which I'm super excited to, because Vlad's done a lot of digging in particular, I want to remind our listeners that you can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. There you'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security, some on-demand webinars I presented on supply chain threats and risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing our product in action, you can sign up for a demo. All that at eclipsium.com/go. We've got a lot to dig into in this episode. I'm super excited to talk about the Black Basta. How do you say that? How do you say that, Vlad? Well, I'm going to turn to you first, Vlad. What is Black Basta and what was leaked? Just like set the stage for our audience.
So, Black Basta, I presume that's how you read it. We don't really know. So, this is a ransomware group, plain and simple. Like a big ransomware group. And what got leaked are their private messages. So, biggest enemy of the ransomware groups are ransomware groups. So,
yeah. And so is this I saw in the data reference to a Matrix chat. Was this a Matrix chat they had?
yes, as far as I can tell.
Okay. For our audience, Matrix is an open source, kind of similar to like Slack, maybe Jabra. It's one of those chat. I don't know what it uses in the background. What does it use in the background? I don't remember. But it's an open source chat communications project.
Yeah, it is open source communications project, but in this case, what we got was a literal file with messages. So
all
with
the
a lot
logs.
of messages.
Yeah.
Around like 200,000 of them.
What is Black Basta? What is the phrase? Is that a reference to something or?
Honestly, I never actually tried to even interpret the name. I'm not even sure if that's how ransomware group calls itself or how we call it.
Okay.
So in this case, like names is not as important.
Yeah. It's
so
open
it's
for
known as
interpretation.
Black Basta, and that's it.
Yeah. Now, was there references that this could also be the Conti group, but like a new iteration of the Conti group? Is that true?
Potentially, yes. So from what I hear, they have intersecting executives. So at the very least, so it might be the same guys.
I got you. And
yeah, one of the usernames in the chat logs, someone, triangulated and was like, it seems like this is the same person that was also caught up in this Conti leaks. And it's super humorous to me how similarly these operations are to just like a regular corporation. Like they rent a big office block in Moscow. The Conti leaks from a couple years ago, the chat frequency was like, oh, these people don't work weekends. It's like the chats are way more frequent on Monday through Friday.
Which is ironic. I just want to point out that we covered the Conti leaks maybe before we had a podcast, but it was certainly a few years ago now that the Conti group leaked their chat. And I think the big takeaway from that was they were talking about targeting Intel ME or CSME in those chat logs was the thing that got us excited here at Eclipsium. So everything comes full circle, and we've got another round of leaked chat logs, which I've said on podcasts before. Look, this is a fantastic source of threat intelligence, right? We talk about the different types of threat intelligence, how useful, how actionable are the different types of threat intelligence. This is the chat logs. Like this is what they were talking about doing anyway, right? It's not actually what they were doing. I mean, I'm sure we could find other evidence of that if we were to go to the logs of some of the systems that they targeted, perhaps, right, is one way. But gaining insights into their operations, I think, is a great source of threat intelligence. And what I want to do on this show is dig deeper into not just the CVEs. I think a lot of the articles that I saw, like really the analysis of these chat log leaks was, well, one, we got a chat GPT session to interact with it, which Vlad, I think your analysis goes far beyond what you could glean from interacting with it via chat GPT. And the other thing I observed was people just pulled a bunch of the CVEs out of the chat logs. They're like, oh, these are the CVEs they're targeting. It's like, well, okay. I mean, we kind of already knew that, right? Like that's, okay, fine. Further evidence, maybe, right? I think the Kev was the Sysy Kev updated as a result of this. I want to say that it was, maybe not directly, or most of it was on the Kev.
I never checked if they actually updated the CAF, but yeah, the 62 CVEs they mentioned, we also know, so they do exist in the chat log, and out of CVEs explicitly listed by the CVE number, those are all the CVEs they used. But yes, as you have said, it goes far beyond that.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like let me start shooting some data.
Well, and
If
also
you read
before we get into the data, Vlad, so do you speak, understand written, spoken Russian? Is that
Yeah.
true? Okay.
Yes,
That
that's
gives
true.
you a
Like, Russian
significant
is
advantage over the rest of us that cannot speak or read Russian, right?
Russian is actually my native language, so
Okay.
believe it or not, I can easily read those chats, even though I don't know how in the hell ChatGPT even understands all of those messages, considering how many typos are in there and how many like jargon words, and like for example,
Yes.
CV just written with Russian letters. So
Yeah.
there is like a lot of fun stuff.
And that was my point. Is I think Vlad, your analysis is particularly interesting because you didn't just rely on the translator, which can obviously make mistakes or not be able to translate jargon in other terms.
Yeah. In my case, I used actually my old friend grep to actually try to get specific words out of the messages and try to focus on messages which are more interesting than the others. So my claim is that they have like golden messages in there, like certain messages which give you a lot more information than the most others.
Oh,
So like
interesting.
if you stumble into one of those, you will suddenly get a lot of information which you would not see otherwise.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
What kind of information would you
So
be looking for? Like, what characterizes a golden message in your eyes?
So, like something that has their operational data. Like for example, golden message ones that I found and understood that that's what I should be hunting for was a description of them breaking into one of their targets. Like very detailed description of them breaking into one of their targets, including like, oh hey, so we broke in. Now we scan the network. Now they have these routers in there, and we suspect that these are attackable, or we have found like 5 printers and we know that printers have a lot of vulnerabilities. We can exploit those printers, etc., etc. And then they actually even wanted to go as far ahead as intercepting traffic, like using some ARP poisoning attacks and by just sitting on the router because they are the man in the middle at that point. So they don't really need to do any extra attack to just listen to traffic. So they were ready to go very deep into the attack, and that message listed 0 CVE numbers explicitly, but key point, they actually exploit printers. I went ahead and hunted down that part, and I found out that they, in fact, do exploit printers. They never listed which vendors, which models, and which CVEs they use, but they listed that printers usually have a lot of CVEs. That's it. That's what we know. So we know that they exploit printers. And
Yeah.
like
Where,
list of CVEs actually.
do the logs indicate they were successful in exploiting printers, or they were just kind of talking about it?
Yes.
Okay, so we do.
In
There's
the case of printer,
confirmation in there. It's interesting because most
yeah,
people, we've always said, hey, you should patch everything, right? And if you can't patch everything, you should make a prioritized list. By the way, if your printers are vulnerable, there's a lot of reasons why you should patch them. One is attackers can use this as a jumping off point. Second is they might be able to glean sensitive information from a printer, but still, everyone's like, I got other priorities. I'm not going to pay attention to printers. Here we have clear evidence that threat actors
yep.
are actively exploiting printers. This is
Yeah,
exciting for
yeah,
me because I feel like I've talked about this for 20 years and no one listens.
there is very clear evidence that they do know about vulnerabilities in printers, and they do claim that printers usually have a lot of them unpatched. So like it's an easy target, and they say that these are usually easy to exploit as well.
Yeah.
So
Is
yeah,
that
your
because
printer's
the
evil.
rest, but is that because I don't know if you glean this from the logs or not, Vlad, but is that because the other environments, like the Windows environments, are locked down and monitored more so than you mentioned? They also target routers and other networking gear in addition to printers.
I honestly don't know if they just target printers. As far as I can say, they target a lot of other stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, that operational message said that they wanted to target some random climate control device in an office, and then
Mm-hmm.
some random Android IP Fire device, and then something else. So they target a lot of devices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and they also target specific services. Like, oh hey, we're inside the network and they have this database running and we can connect to it. Maybe we can actually exploit that database. Like I
Mm-hmm.
underline database. They're not even exploiting an operating system. They're exploiting the database itself. So yeah, in this case, like they are very opportunistic. So if you
Right.
have something in the network that's attackable and they scan it, they will probably at least discuss attacking it. And from what I saw, there is evidence that they're ready to develop their own exploits as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a junior guy, which would classify in the corporation terms,
Mm-hmm.
which was trying to write some kind of exploit with ISLR bypass. So
Mm-hmm.
not the simplest exploit, not even your
Sure.
dumb buffer overflow, but like with extras.
Yeah.
And he got stuck, and they were discussing helping him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I found the continuation of that message thread, but they really have junior guys writing exploits and senior guys writing exploits helping those junior guys. So they're ready to do
Interesting.
their own exploits.
Yeah,
It's
which is
been a
interesting because
heartwarming.
but we often speculate that many ransomware groups, as an example, may purchase exploits rather than write them themselves. But here we have clear evidence that they do at least try to write their own exploits. It's
Yeah.
cheaper that way, I guess.
Also, yep. Also, what I suspect I saw is like at least attempt to acquire 0 days for at least 6 different products.
Hmm. So they're also acquiring. So
So
writing in house, but also
yeah.
acquiring. Yeah,
Yep. Like message structure and like just how it was proposed heavily implied it was a 0 day acquisition. Like
sure.
I don't know if it really was a 0 day because like I might be just plain wrong that it was a 0 day because I mean
Yeah,
message
sure.
this random chat message. But it looks strongly like they were actually discussing getting a 0 day more than once. I listed all of the products in the outline, so we'll probably go out in blog.
Yeah.
So read that. But like evidence is they actually do try to get 0 days as well. So I
Any
wouldn't be too surprised if
Any
they do.
insights what the initial attack vectors are? Is it phishing or credential reuse combination?
So in this case, like what there is in chat logs, a lot of what there is in chat logs, we should probably not publish explicitly, is that they have credentials. They just have
Mm-hmm.
credentials and credentials and credentials. I assume from credential complexity that it is not always credential stuffing.
Yep.
And credentials, for the most part, go to different vantage points on the network. Like, for example, to name drop a few vendors, but not to pretty much bash them as an head, it would be like
Sure.
Fortinet, Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto, Citrix. So they try to attack some kind of network device which is facing the outside. And in this case, they get credentials and they log into it. In this
Is
case,
there
like
is there a
credential,
mix? I saw a mix, Vlad, of perhaps administrative credentials for those devices. In
yep,
addition, if that device was a VPN, then any Active Directory, conceivably, credentials are valid on there. It
yep,
seemed to be a mix of both,
yep.
right?
Yep, it's a mix of like administrative credentials and VPN credentials,
Mm-hmm.
and they also drop credentials for RDP directly. Like I have seen evidence that they have RDP credentials in there of all things.
Mm-hmm.
So like port 3389 and Windows domain name after the at letter. Yeah, it's 100% RDP. So
Yeah.
we have
Do
people
not
with
put
RDP
RD. I
facing.
just like public service announcement.
Do
Do
not.
not put RDP on the internet. So, and I'll give you one real world example why that wasn't in the chat logs. Maybe my IP is now, but I wasn't running RDP. But I stood in a server up on the internet through a cloud provider, right? Because I used this cloud provider for DNS hosting, so I have to spin a lot like
Mhm.
one cloud system up to maintain that access because I'm too lazy to move it somewhere else. But I always find a usage for something to spin up in the cloud. And I applied a firewall IP tables rule set to this particular cloud service so that only I could access it, right, to block it off from the internet. And when I was monitoring the logs, before I even like did any other testing of my own. I just spun up the drop logs from my firewall, and I was seeing like a flurry of log entries, and a lot of it was port 3389 for RDP. And I was like, wow.
Yep.
So attackers are really looking hard for RDP on the internet, and these chat logs kind of back that up as well.
It's not just RDP. Like if you spin up an SSH server, within 5 minutes somebody will try to brute force your password. So my honest advice, if you can help it, don't expose anything on the internet but a VPN port, which should be a random port, and it should be a well-configured WireGuard or OpenVPN.
Yeah. So I just another PSA out there, because we're looking at the actual techniques used by ransomware groups, right? And that looking into the defensive techniques. And they're not a sponsor of the show. They do sponsor a lot of podcasts, but I use Tailscale. Yes, I've set up WireGuard myself. Yes, that was like, that's fun. I'm like, however, Tailscale is amazing, and it gives you a free account. You can have up to 100 systems and 3 users for free. And I've adopted it fully now, and I don't expose any stuff to the internet anymore. I'm like, this is great. And this is reducing your attack surface, because what we're gleaning that the real threat actors are doing, we can mitigate that if we don't expose stuff to the internet. Now, for me, that's much easier than an enterprise with 100,000 users and tens of thousands of systems, right? Yeah, it's a different story.
Yeah, enterprise is harder, but again, your personal security, don't expose all the stuff on the internet, because like there is heavy evidence that this group is specifically targeting organizations, and 90% of the time they actually post a target, they actually post its revenue upfront. So the only one targets who can pay them. But at the same time, there is evidence that they just randomly attack RDP servers. So it's not like if you are. So if you don't if you don't like if you don't have money, it doesn't mean you will not get attacked. So like if you do something very dumb, they will just opportunistically attack you because they can. So don't expect them to be Robin Hoods or something like this.
Yeah.
So they don't attack on the rich targets.
You mentioned that they're using Shodan and Zumai and stuff, and just sort of enumerating targets that way. And there's just like there's low hanging fruit out there. If you have stuff, if you're on Shodan with something they can attack, it's like, well, why not? It's low cost to them to try. Yeah, or you might just catch a stray. It's just like they see your thing, they're like, okay, sure, that's exposed. Attack it as a matter.
It will cost me 3 minutes to attack, and I might get some money. Why not?
Right. Which is another thing. You should be doing some type of attack surface management. I mean, Shodan has plans you can subscribe and monitor your own IP space, which is great.
Yeah, this is obviously more for enterprise, for your private customer. To be honest, like outside of all of the cool technologies, there is a really good OpenVPN setup guide from DigitalOcean, which you can follow up on within a few hours. So like if you are touchy enough to actually expose something to the internet, like a service or something like that, then you are touchy enough to actually follow that guy through, and within 2-3 hours you will actually have a fully up and running OpenVPN instance. Again, this is outside of all of the other cool solutions already mentioned, like Cloudflare tunnels and Tailscale. So if you don't want any of the paid services or any of the, like, it's configured for me, so I don't know how it's configured, you can just grab OpenVPN and just configure it using guides on the internet.
Yeah. So it seems like there was a focus on discovery and exploitation of stuff exposed to the internet that isn't necessarily Windows. I mean, RDP aside, they seem to be looking for a lot of exposed devices. Is that true, Vlad? I think a lot of it points to that.
Yep, a lot of it points to that, and they even throw around straight shutdown dorks. I have even listed the dorks they use, because at some messages they do have a list of dorks they use to find stuff, and those dorks indicate not just devices, they indicate attacks against, like, yeah, of course, okay, let me up level a bit. They indicate a lot of attacks against stuff like firewalls, like VPN appliances and whatnot, but they also indicate attacks against a specific ports, like they want to find something on a specific port because that specific port is used by a device they probably can attack. And then they also have WordPress and PHPMyAdmin as targets. I presume for credential stuffing, maybe they have some 0 days we don't know about, but I assume it's credential stuffing as well. They do try to attack Magento. They do even have like some targets to actually have like attacks against some corporate things. Again, I presume with credential stuffing, but I might be wrong here. So there is a lot of like they attack whatever they can find. Like if there is a dork they can use to actually target something, they will do it.
Yeah, they're not doing it for the laws. They're doing it. They want to get in, and these are the things that
Yeah.
get them in. Yeah.
Yep. They want to get in and they want to get your money. So they ransomware gang. They're not interested in just exploiting it for fun. They want to get a ransom from you or sell your data to competitors or both. So
And it's interesting they seem to be looking for opportunistic. I'm going to go over the internet and exploit something rather than a phishing. Was there mention of phishing campaigns in here?
I don't remember they mentioned phishing campaigns specifically, but I would not be surprised with their scale if they do that as well.
Right.
So yeah. So I honestly don't remember. So we'll need to check messages. Like vaguely, I think I saw a message or two mentioned that. But yeah, in this case, like they have a lot of vectors. Credential stuff and exploits, public and private. So I don't see why in the hell they will not use phishing as well. So if the user is dumb, maybe we can bite them.
Right. Right.
We got a message in the live stream chat saying Cloudflare tunnels are great too.
Nice.
Good shout, Wes.
Yep.
So
I'll never turn down an opportunity to say Shodan dorks over and over again. The hackers aren't just doing it for the lulz, but I feel like Shodan called it Shodan dorks for the lulz. Like, why would they do that?
So I see lists of network devices: Palo Alto, Cisco, Fortinet, Pulse Secure, WatchGuard, Juniper, F5, Citrix. Are these primarily the foothold, like the initial, what would we call that? Initial attack vector, or is it also the foothold that they're using it, right? They've already got into the network, and now these are internal systems not exposed to the internet. And like, great,
So
my exploit works whether or not it's on the internet, whether it's on the internal network, doesn't matter as long as I have.
So
access
yeah,
to it.
in this case, like they try to attack something that's exposed to the internet, and afterwards they scan the network and exploit whatever is on the network to get extra hold.
Yeah,
I
okay.
assume some of those are extra foothold because, I mean, sure, you attack a printer, you might steal whatever it's printing, but it definitely doesn't sound as interesting as, oh, hey, this is another vantage point. So if I get evicted from my VPN appliance, I will still have a backdoor on the printer itself. So
And they're using these to pivot into the Windows domain?
yep, they are. They most definitely are. Like I have seen them specifically doing that. Like specifically sitting on a network device and breaking into a domain. And yeah, they also dump your hashes. So even if you patch up your initial vector, you do have to change your passwords afterwards, like as a spoiler to any organizations affected. So they might have your password hashes and they might be able to brute force your passwords. So yeah, your users needs to change them.
Yeah, and that's interesting because oftentimes I think that the trend in the thread we like to pull on is, well, you're basically gonna succumb to a phishing attack, and they're going to get initial access to a Windows computer and use that to pivot. But operationally speaking, it's changed since, or at least we're observing that there's a heavy focus on implanting inside the network into different devices that maybe aren't attached to the Windows domain. To maintain persistence. And we've seen a trend of that. It's interesting. I've seen adversarial emulation teams from legitimate pen test companies do that years ago. And now I think we're seeing it more so in the real world. And this is certainly evidence of that.
Yep, Black Basta is definitely doing that. Like, no questions asked, they are doing that. And also consider that there are a lot of devices which can be attached to Windows domains that are not Windows. Like, to name drop a few BMC devices have that capability. So, like, you can attach a BMC device to Windows domain. So if you attack that, suddenly you have some access to Windows domain.
Interesting. Yeah, so you're right. And printers do this too, in addition to, of course, VPN appliances. There's the separate username and password. They're basically federating access to these devices through the Windows domain.
Yep. So I wouldn't be too surprised if they got some of the access from the devices themselves. It's very hard to tell if they actually do this and how often they see it, because they don't explicitly discuss a lot of stuff. But I do see targets where they worm in using some VPN appliance, and then suddenly they got domain credentials dumped. So somehow they are worming their way to that.
Yeah,
So while being on a VPN appliance.
there are vulnerabilities, and I want to say it was with Avanti specifically that I recall there was a vulnerability in their VPN appliance that allowed attackers to exfiltrate credentials, and that might have been hashes, right? And then you get in the whole Windows, defensive security posture, like how have you configured your Windows Active Directory or Azure AD or whatever Microsoft calls it now, right? There's a million different ways to configure that to prevent against certain attacks, but attackers have a lot of techniques in their arsenal to accomplish their goals.
I will name drop at least one. So they mention Eternal Blue. That's for sure. So if you think you no longer need to patch your Windows devices, well, you do. Attackers will use exploits that got published before, like Eternal Blue, sure. They also mentioned explicit use of Metasploit, and I do believe they also use Cobalt Strike.
Sure.
So again, it's very open to interpretation, but I don't see how to interpret Koba proxy other than a Cobalt Strike proxy. Like I have tried to Google for it for a while, so I couldn't find anything, so I interpret it as Cobalt Strike proxy. So they are using public tools which have a lot of vulnerabilities, exploits for vulnerabilities.
For vulnerabilities, yeah, sure. And I mean, why not, right? Yeah, you're going to write your own exploits, but you're not going to write everything yourself.
Yep.
If there's public frameworks available, you're gonna use it at the risk of getting caught, right? But ransomware is, the clock ticks. Like at some point, they're gonna get caught anyhow because they're gonna collect a ransom and they're gonna know they're there, right? And at that point, the ransomware getting so goal, it's too late. So, we talk about detection techniques for things like Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, and the like, but you got to detect it early enough to stop it. I think that's what they're banking on, right?
Yep. And in this case, also, it's not hey, let's take down Metasploit. No, that would be counterproductive because A, attackers have a copy of it. B, they're still going to exploit all those vulnerabilities, even if they don't have Metasploit. It's just that defenders will have a much harder day on their hands. Because now you can run an attack emulation team, which can find all of those holes before attackers do. So doing an actual infrastructure pen test is actually useful for a large enterprise. Get a team to actually scan your infrastructure and tell what vulnerabilities are even exposed, because ransomware gun is gonna do exactly that.
Right.
So
right. And there was some 0 days for various appliances. Is that true?
Yep. There were I do believe 6 0 days. So it was Juniper, Windows itself, Ivanti Pool Secure, Sonic Panel, Wildix, and Unified Remote. So I saw them discussing a specific exploits for those 6 things, and for Windows more than once. So
and was that? Do you know if that's exploits they had, exploits they were developing, or exploits they're looking to acquire, or we just see references to it, right?
Very hard to say because they have a whole checklist of what that exploit is for. So it sounded a lot like, oh, hey, you want to buy your exploit? Tell us what that exploit is for, and then we will share it in our own chat and discuss if we want it. So it sounded a lot like that kind of deal. So
I see. Yep.
And those don't mention CV numbers, and they are shared by an account called ZDays. So there is a lot of evidence that those might be a 0-day exploit, or an exploit for some public vulnerability for which exploit doesn't exist. Publicly doesn't exist. So that vulnerability might get overlooked. So one of the two is almost for sure.
They're really not obfuscating much in the chats using terms like Cobalt proxy and Z days. They're not. It's funny that the the Conti chat leaks sort of the narrative about that is that it led to a decline in the Conti group. Is that after the chat leaks, the overall group kind of declined, and maybe some people departed, and some of those same people are now involved in Black Basta, and there's this sort of revolving door of the high level people within these groups. And it's funny that the biggest threat to a ransomware gang might be insider threat and chat logs getting leaked, but the idea that internally they're basically, it's not literally Slack, but they basically have an in-office Slack. It reminds me of that scene in The Wire when Stringer Bell is like, are you taking notes on a criminal conspiracy right now? One of the like young kids is taking notes about how they're going to do the deals, and it's like they're doing that. They're taking notes on the criminal conspiracy, and they're not obfuscating what they're saying or doing in there at all, in spite of the fact that leaked chat logs have been directly responsible for the downfall of prior ransomware gangs.
Yep. Yep. And like to add insult to injury, like Black Basta use also analyze other malware. So I have seen them linking malware bazaar, and they pretty much just analyze malware from there. So there are multiple links. So they are trying to get exploits from wherever they can, including other ransomware gangs and other attackers. So
Yeah, that's interesting that, and not shocking that if you're a ransomware group, that you would look at and analyze everyone else's tools and techniques and incorporate them into your own. I mean, much like we
Yep.
do as pen testers and security researchers, right? We don't have to
Yep.
reinvent the wheel. We don't. And ransomware gangs do the same thing, obviously.
Yep, like they operate much like we would expect an actual pen testing company. Like you're trying to get a lot of techniques implemented that you can reuse across different pen tests you do. You are trying to get a good red team to actually have a in-depth pen tests. Then you don't just penetrate for access, but also scan the infrastructure and whatnot and try to go deep. So more like red teaming exercise. I can see them trying to find targets that can pay for their pen tests. So and try to market to them. Like it's a very lot like I would expect an entire enterprise to operate.
Right.
Not just like a random ragtag group of criminals, but an actual enterprise. Like it surprisingly feels like that.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me like nothing's off the table, right? We talked about their
Yep.
techniques so far of using other tools, known exploits, unknown, 0 days, different tools, open source tools. Was there anything in there that you were like, wow, I didn't expect them to use that? Or was it pretty much they're using what we already know about in terms of tooling?
So what I honestly didn't expect is the scale. Like just how much they're ready to do. Like it's really not a small group. Like they do a lot. Like I didn't expect them to try implement advanced exploits because for me it would sound kind of counterproductive for a malware gang, but they don't care about what I think and they just do it. So in this case, like I wouldn't say I saw anything completely mind blowing besides them doing all of that at once. So like you usually think like, oh hey, this group uses the CVs and that's it. No, like these guys actually use whatever they can. That was the most surprising part.
Right.
And
For
they
both
go
exploits and tooling and malware
Yup.
and backdoors and what we call orbs. Well, do they implement an orb, operational relay boxes, to maintain access? I mean, at some point they
I
know
think
that,
yes.
but they still need to maintain access to their targets.
Yep. Yep. They have like they stand up a whole bunch of servers with root credentials, which I strongly suspect are their infrastructure. Like they have just credentials, credentials, and credentials, and some of them suddenly look like an whole IP block of servers where they have root access. So, what could it be? Operational relay boxes, maybe. So
Oh
like
yeah,
this
that's
is
it's a great point. So do we gain any insights and data about their infrastructure?
yeah.
Or
So
do you
I
think
don't think
they probably burned it down and recreated it by this point now anyway?
so. Yeah, I tried to log in into all of those boxes and I couldn't. So sadly, they burned them down. But like we did gain information that they actually get a block of IP addresses somehow and host boxes there, or maybe they drop exploits on another VPS and just again host there.
Sure.
So it's not a huge surprise in this case. And like they are ready to even brute force your passwords. So as I have said, nothing is off the table. If they get a hash, they will brute force it. So they will brute force it and they will successfully crack it if it is stupid enough. So they have GPUs, they have everything. Like they are actual enterprise. Like if you would expect a good enterprise to have it, they will have it. So yeah.
That's
So I
crazy.
don't even know. Yeah, what else do you want to add? Like they have everything. they have operational boxes, they have persistencies through like trying to exploit whatever they can on the network. They try to get into your database. They try to get into your Windows domain. They try to get to intercept your traffic to catch data from you. And like if it is valuable enough, they might actually, blackmail you for it. And then like they use Shodan dorks to find their targets and Google dorks to find their targets. They also do exploits. They get 0 days. They write their own exploits. They analyze others' malware. So like this is a whole operational gang. And like even in the chat leaks, they have like it's not a single huge chat room. No, it's a lot of smaller chat rooms. So they even have their own Slack. So like it's it's surprisingly like enterprise.
Yeah, for sure. Is there were they discussing any of their targets or who they're actively ransomwaring at the time
Yep.
that you noticed?
I don't know like if it was at the time because the leak is kinda old-ish, but like they do discuss targets. Like when they actually find something exploitable, they try to understand who that is. And as I have said, they post target name and revenue up front. So they don't want to attack targets who are poor. And they don't mind attacking whatever targets. Like I have seen actual government domains being attacked. And
Sure.
like educational domains and even hospitals and whatnot. So they have nothing is holy for them. So if the target can pay, they will attack the target. And consider this: if you pay in ransomware group, information that you paid will probably float around, and you are gonna be a more likely target for the next ransomware group because you pay.
Right.
So
Interesting.
So you don't want to pay ransomware gangs because they're going to be less likely to attack you because they don't get money even if they ransom you.
And just because you someone paid, does that mean they remove all the back doors, or probably not? Right.
I don't think so.
Mm.
Like I haven't seen indication of if they remove their backdoors or if they keep them or if they even tell how they broke in. So I also suspect that they get the data and it's not a guarantee that they remove it. I mean, they can get money from you and then get money from your competitor for your data.
Right.
So don't expect your data to suddenly be deleted like a good Robin Hood would.
Yeah.
So
Once your data is gone, it's gone, and they're going to monetize that, and
yep,
probably potentially share their credentials as well. I mean, they could probably sell that. Anything they find has value on the black market, if you will.
yep. Everything that has value they will try to sell, to grab, to monetize. So
Are they? Do you think they're buying credentials? Was there evidence that they were purchasing credentials?
honestly, I have not seen explicit messages, but I didn't try to look for that angle specifically. So like I might have missed them purchasing credentials.
Well,
So
certainly there's
wouldn't be too
public,
surprised. Yeah,
public
wouldn't be
leaks
too
too.
surprised if they do. Yeah, I wouldn't be too surprised if they do. Like at this point, they do a lot of stuff, and up to a level of where I wouldn't be surprised if they also purchase credentials from others. But I never checked that. Like I never looked for that specifically.
Gotcha. Defensively, do our recommendations change, or do we adjust priorities based on what we've gleaned from this?
So to be honest, like I would honestly at this point try to defensively monitor your network for vulnerable devices. Like again, I kind of don't want to turn this into a product shill, but
Sure.
we have a network devices scanner. So that thing turns out to be much more useful than we suspected it to be. So that's like like yeah, this is kind of an obvious shill, not gonna lie, but in this case it's perfect match. Like
Right.
you need to monitor your network devices, and like even if not with our product, you need to use something, maybe Nmap as a baseline. So like you need to know what's on your network and to patch those devices because those devices are actually evil now. So they will try to exploit whatever holes they can, and they don't see IoT devices security getting any better within the next 5 to 10 years simply because of its size. You're still gonna have devices which are easy to exploit. And my honest recommendation to organizations like CISA would be to give advisories to actually push vendors to start fixing the problem, because like it's not just APT groups who are, governments and whatnot who are exploiting all this, but it's your normal pedestrian ransomware gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only gonna get worse because there are more and more research, more and more exploits, and more ways to actually research the set devices. So it's not gonna get any easier for the enterprise to defend them.
Yeah, I think for me, I always thought ransomware gangs were heavily focused on Windows and Windows only exploits. And what
No.
this show, this is evidence that it's anything they can use to gain a foothold and
Yep.
persistence.
Yep, and anything they can use to get to your data. So if you have a database instance facing your
Right.
internal network, sure as hell they will try to brute force it and break in. Sure as hell they're gonna find vulnerabilities in it if it is old enough. So whatever exposed network service you have, they're interested.
Mm,
So even if it is not gonna be something standard.
right.
So
Right. And credentials are important as well. I mean, we talk about
Yep.
vulnerability management and patching, but
yep, you need
credentials are it's a different beat. It's not really
Yep.
patching, right? It's a different
Yep,
activity.
you need to have good credentials and all of that. Like without jokes, if your credentials are simple, they will try to brute force them into credential stuff. So don't use the same password everywhere. Like
Mm-hmm.
for God's sake, as a person, to improve your own security and security of your organizations, don't use the same password everywhere. And use a password manager with strong passwords. Like it's insanely important. Like a lot of those attacks, a lot of those credentials, if you read through them, it's brute forceable passwords. It's
Mm.
passwords that you can read and understand what that password means, and that means it's a bad password. So a lot of the times to enable attackers to even do brute force, you need to have a stupid enough password. Like if your passwords would all be 20 characters long and random, brute force would not be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would have to be other attacks. Like 20 character password is just not crackable. Like just set up yourself a password manager and just use random passwords. Like sure, you will need to remember one password to get into the credential manager and maybe one other password to get into your Windows machine, but that's it. No other passwords you really need to remember afterwards.
Mm.
And make a backup of the database like in 5 different locations so that you don't suddenly lose access to all of your accounts. And that's it. It's not gonna even inconvenience you.
Yeah, because
Like
a lot
there are
of
so many good
that
products out
device
there
that device access too, a lot of it's not federated to administer the device, right?
Yep.
I mean, there are solutions for using remember TACAX. I did an implementation of that, and that's certainly better, but not every device plays on that standard that we talked about, right? In your environment. So then you're right, Glad you're back to password managers, not just for like the websites you log into, but important for administrators. In fact, that's a big use case for the password vault companies. And their pitch to the enterprise is first of all the shareable nature, but secondly you can put your SSH keys, you can put your passwords for all your devices in a safer vault, which I think is important.
Yeah, and in my case, I actually use KeePass. Like it's an open
Mhm.
source solution. So, and I'm trying not to advertise a specific one. Just why am I using it is because it's specifically not cloud. Like I have a local file with passwords, a file with the keys that encrypts it, and passwords that like with key file and password I use it together. So that like even if you get my file with my passwords database, you still need to have a key file, otherwise you will not get anything. And then I'm using a strong password like to get access into it. So suddenly, like if like I'm not even using, I don't even remember my password from the enterprise password manager. So I'm using KeePass to log into everything.
Right.
Like it's an open source product and it's probably not gonna be a big deal. And it's not even using any cloud. Like you have a local files that you decide how you wanna transfer yourself.
Right.
So this way, there is no one point which attackers can break into and just attack all of the organizations. Like the weak point about all of those password vault organizations, I don't even want to think about the nightmare scenario where one password will get ransomware.
Yeah. Well, a lot of I think you're better off. I mean, as we looked at the leak and realized credentials are very much in play, and we look at the solutions to combat that in password vaults. To me, one of the major weaknesses is the copy paste buffer. That's been problematic across all the products. There are still ways that you can play games with the buffer. They have done some things such as a short expiry on how long it lives in the buffer, but that's still very much a vector. That being said, you're better off with one than without one, especially as we
Yep.
look at when a ransomware gang is targeting you. All credentials are in play.
Yep, and like, yeah, and also I see a chat message. Yeah, service account management is indeed important. Like, if you have like, so if you have service accounts stored in a vault somewhere, check that vault for security itself, because like breaking into a password vault that's held in your enterprise service accounts, yeah, it's a tasty target itself. So
Right.
you need to manage them well. You need to protect access to those credentials, and you need to have them strong. Like if your database can log in with like a service or something like this, attackers will use it. So service accounts are in the same boat. And in case of service accounts, it's much easier because you can just mandate that password for every service is going to be 32 characters long. Done. Like no brute force of that password will ever happen, and because no human will ever type in that password, it's not going to be inconveniencing anyone.
Right.
Well, developers a little bit, but sure, developers can survive typing one more password in the months.
Right. No, it's great. It's great insights. Was there anything else in there, Vlad, that we didn't talk about?
To be honest, it's very hard to tell what we didn't discuss yet. Like that would be, to be honest, it from my perspective. Like I obviously didn't read through all of the 200,000 messages. Like that would be way too much. Like I'm a human after all, not an LLM. But like that would be the tastiest parts. So
Chase,
note,
any thoughts on all these insights?
I feel like it confirms a lot of the things that we are continuously talking about, which is, I mean, the notion of credentials being the way in, and, you know, access management, secure access management, remote access solutions being vulnerable, and particularly network devices being targeted, which honestly, it makes me feel like we as Eclipsium are barking up the right tree. It's like this is real validation. There's sort of this intermediate level of information that we can get. Like we look at the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities all the time, right? We look at these sort of public sources of information, but that's a layer removed from what's happening on the ground. And these chat logs are like very representative of what's happening on the ground. And so to see the discussion and the like chain of thought, if you will, within these organizations like Black Basta, where they're talking about, okay, how are we going to get into this one? Is it worth it? Can we like exploit the printers, or what network infrastructure do we have that we can pivot to? Talking about which vulnerabilities to use. It's like, okay, our sort of model of what an attacker is doing inside of one of these organizations, this is validating for that to me. It's like, okay, the way that we are describing to our customers, to the people that we're trying to help, the way that we're talking about how attackers work, and therefore what kind of controls and what kind of monitoring you need to introduce to be the best position to stop them is very accurate. You know, the vendors that they're talking about having vulnerabilities, or like buying 0 days, or talking about exploiting the sort of network infrastructure stuff that they're looking for as a potential attack surface once they've achieved initial intrusion, is all, it's the stuff they're always saying. So in a way, I'm glad that this didn't reveal like some sort of unknown wacky like other thing that they're doing that we're like, oh, hadn't thought of that before.
I think you're right. It's advice that we in insights that we're giving the community to be like, look, just because it's not exposed to the internet doesn't mean you shouldn't patch it and harden it, right? Because attackers are going to get a foothold and they're going to find it on the inside of your network. And it's also you need to harden your devices beyond just the remotely exploitable vulnerabilities and or conditions, right? Because once they get that foothold, they're going to persist, they're going to escalate privilege, and making their jobs harder is what we should be focused on, not necessarily plugging every hole in every single system, across everything, because that's next to impossible. But hardening and having these different layers and making their lives more difficult, I think, is where it's at. And we're making it too easy. We're like, oh, I don't need to rush to patch that because it's not exposed to the internet. Or, that's an authenticated vulnerability, command injection. I don't need to patch that. I mean, I think what we learned from these chat logs is we have evidence that you do, right? You need to pay attention to all these things.
Yeah, exactly. Introducing that friction, like just imposing it, making it a little harder, a little more costly at every layer. And the chat logs betray that they're talking about it at every layer and deciding whether or not to proceed based on how much work it's going to be or how hard it's going to be. And so it's like, this is strong evidence that sort of internal hardening pays off, because if they get in, which they're going to get in with the credentials, not everybody at every organization is doing a great job using KeyPass the way that Vlad is. They're going to get in, and then they're checking how easy it's going to be and sort of analyzing at every layer whether it's worth it to keep going.
Right.
And if you can make it not worth it to them pretty easily, because there's lots of targets. They have tons of potential targets, and they're a huge input to which target they decide to go after is just finding the one that's like best sort of cost benefit analysis. It's like, this one seems like they can pay a lot based on the organization, and it's going to be pretty easy based on what we're seeing in here.
For sure. Any other final thoughts?
To be honest, no. I think I said everything that I could.
Awesome. Well, Chase and Vlad, thank you for joining Below the Surface this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. We hope you get some great insights from this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
It's been a delight.